Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds, and welcome back to the Dark Tower Retrospectives. Been a while, but I've had to reread this one, The Walls of the Calla. This is, Walls of the Calla is book 5 of the Dark Tower series, and it is generally regarded as the one at which the story takes a very particular turn. The whole series is very literate and very aware of its influences from day one, from the Gunslinger onward. It is very aware of its influences. Wolves of the Calla is technically where it becomes aware of itself as a story and the influences that act upon the mythology, the imagery become overt within the story. The characters start. This is the point at which the characters start to acknowledge that certain elements of their journey are redolent of stories that they have encountered, that they've read, that they've seen in comic books, in films, in video games, and it's such a strange experience. As I discussed in earlier episodes, there does come a point, and it's in the next book actually, it's in the Song of Susanna, where this meta quality, where the story becomes a meta-narrative, where it is so aware of its own mythic nature that the characters start to comment upon it and start to recognise their own created mythic nature, or rather the roles that they are playing within this almost like universal metaphysical plot. It comes to a very particular head, and it's the way that happens. I'll discuss it properly when we get into that particular book, but when that happens, a lot of people turn off. A lot of people just turn off. And I can understand why. This is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to balance, to write a story that is simultaneously legitimate as a story, that functions as a narrative in and of itself, but is aware of the fact that it's a story, or that it's conforming to certain mythic rhythms and archetypes. That is a very, very hard thing to do. What carries it is what has carried this series from the very beginning, which is the way King writes it. King's writing is very particular. There's a reason why he is so popular, and that is that he takes you by the hand. His writing is non-ornamented for the most part. It is not purple, it's not flowery, it's not particularly over-descriptive, it's colloquial. It's like he's having a chat with you. It's very American in that regard. It's very American in a very particular tradition. It's not like, say, the old European and British writers. It's conversational. It's like you're sat in a bar and he's talking to you and telling you this story. And when the characters talk, as a result, it's very naturalistic, and that carries it through. In a more stentorian or traditional style, this story probably wouldn't have worked so well. But because of the way it's written, it just carries you through. There's some great characters here. It's called The Walls of the Calla because of a particular place that the characters find themselves in their quest along the beam. So everything after Wizard and Glass, everything after The Wind Through the Keyhole is kind of wrapped up at this point, and they find themselves in a kind of strange place called the Calla. The Calla is like it's like a village. It's like a little village that's near mountains. It's little. It's rural. It's like a little old-fashioned rural American town from sort of frontier days, with a healthy dose of technology thrown in for the science fiction elements. There is actually a robot called Andy in the town who's very odd, very strange. He's quite sinister. Whether he means to be or not depends on, it remains to be seen. You have to read the story to find out. But he is quite sinister. And there's something happening in this town. There's like a tradition where at particular points, certain generations of children are taken from the town to the nearby mountains. And when they are returned, something has been done to them. They are swollen and lumpen, and they die very quickly. It's like something has been tested on them. They've been transformed genetically. And what takes them are these robots, these creatures that look bizarrely like Doctor Doom from the Marvel comics, from Marvel superhero comics. And this is deliberate. This is actually deliberate. It's an influence upon the story. In fact, I think it's Jake Chambers who comments upon the fact that the robots, when they occur, look like Doctor Doom. It's part of the strange narrative and mythological influence that's occurring here. Because, I mean, Roland in and of himself is kind of like a Marvel superhero. He's a Western gunslinger, so he's from like spaghetti westerns. And that's another influence here too. Because Roland and his quartet end up arming and training the villagers to fight the robots when they come for the children. And that is it's Sergio Leone, it's the Magnificent Seven, it's Seven Samurai. And that is a massive, those films are massive influences on this story, just as Sergio Leone, sort of Wild West stories and films and cinema have been an influence on the stories and mythology of the Dark Tower from the very beginning, and certainly on Roland. I mean, massively. Roland is a character from those stories, mingled with the Arthurian Knight, mingled with a little bit of Gandalf, a little bit of like wizardry thrown in there as well. He's all those things mingled together. But here, it's so overt. It's so overt. The story plays out like the story of the Magnificent Seven. It really does, with lots of other little influences thrown in. One of the more interesting things about this story, we were talking earlier about it being aware of its own nature as a story. Well, this is the point at which you get very clear and overt references to, not just references, but actual characters turning up from other Stephen King stories. So, Father Callahan, from the Salem's Lot, from the end of Salem's Lot, the priest from Salem's Lot, turns up as a main character in this story. Now, in Salem's Lot, at the end of Salem's Lot, Father Callahan doesn't necessarily comport himself with all due grace. He fails in his test of faith against the vampire Barlow. Here, he gets a sort of redemptive arc. Father Callahan exists in the Calla, and I know, Callahan, Calla, and yes, this is something they point out, the fact that there are these sort of like linguistic overlaps and coincidences occurring. It becomes woven into the story and part of its mythology. And Callahan, he tells his story of what happened to him after what happened in Salem's Lot. The vampires from Salem's Lot end up being part of the Dark Tower story. They're actually the servants of the Crimson King, the ultimate force of negativity and evil in these stories, the destructive influence, the influence of chaos and anarchy. They are his servants. They are his. They're sort of like his right-hand men in the material planes and the realms of the tower, who are working to bring it down. So Callahan is a really significant character in this story, and it's great to see. It's great to see this character who had such a presence, such an influence in one of King's more traditional stories, turn up here. I mean, technically you've got a few others as well. I mean, Walter O'Deem or the Man in Black is Randall Flagg from The Stand. Yeah, that's definitely true. But he's a much more distant, antagonistic entity, whereas Callahan is a definite character from another Stephen King story. It establishes absolutely that these stories are all set in the same meta-universe. It's actually really fun. There's also a lot of weird stuff that happens. There's a lot of overlap between this reality, sort of the real world, the waking world, and the slightly more mythic planes in which Roland's story occurs. So there's this phenomena that happens where Eddie and Jake have these strange, hallucinogenic, shamanistic journeys back to the waking world, where they find that a manifestation of the Dark Tower in the real version of New York, which is a rose, the rose is like a manifestation or an influence of the tower within New York, and there are forces trying to destroy it. And they have to use their dreaming influence within New York to prevent that from happening. And it involves lots of weird sort of like dreaming, time travel-y stuff, which is actually really good. Stephen King, when he wrote science fiction stuff in his early days wasn't that good. Stuff like the Langoliers, for example, pretty damn terrible. And he said that himself. He doesn't like the Langoliers very much. He said that himself. Tommy Knockers, not a fan. Not a fan myself. I know people love it. I know people out there love it. Not a fan myself. But this is really good. This slightly sort of like metaphysical, perceptual time travel that has a kind of science fiction element to it works really bloody well. What's happening is this rose exists in a particular vacant lot in New York, and there is a corporation called the Sombra Corporation that is trying to buy it from the man who owns it, so that they can demolish it, they can destroy the vacant lot, they can build upon it, and that will destroy the rose, and it will weaken the tower's influence in the waking world. It becomes apparent that this rose is absolutely essential, because the roses are symbolically resonant. You will find out why when we get to the very end of the series, by the way. At the very end, we find out what the roses are all about. But this rose is absolutely essential. It has to be maintained. It has to be preserved. So they have to use their influence and their knowledge of the future to undo what they know is going to come about. And it's really cool the way it's done. I really, really like it. It's a good little arc at the beginning that's happening sort of as the more fantastical, mythic Sergio Leone Magnificent Seven stuff is occurring in the Akira Kurosawa stuff, if you're going for Seven Samurai. In Roland's world, it's really cool. It shows you how the influence of the negative forces and this war between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, between light and darkness, is happening cross-dimensionally across all worlds, in all realities, in all times and places. And it's only these very small coincidences and influences of Ka or fate that are preventing everything from collapsing in on itself. It's really fun. On top of that, you've got this stuff happening with Susanna as well. Those of you who were with us when I did The Wastelands, rather the Drawing of Three, the third book in the series, will know that Susanna, when she first occurred, was not Susanna. She was this incredibly disturbed woman who was suffering from dissociative personality disorder. So she had multiple personalities that Roland kind of cohered into a coherent whole, which was Susanna, the woman she was always supposed to be. Well, Susanna is being influenced by another personality, another entity in her head called Maya. Maya, who is kind of like a mythic character. She's Maya, the mother of none. She's a kind of maternal spirit, and she's caring in her own peculiar way for the creature that's growing in Susanna's belly. Susanna is pregnant, and it becomes apparent that there's something very unusual about this baby, something that's affecting her mind. And it's kind of interesting, it's kind of fun. You get some great action sequences in this one. King really writes action very well. When the wolves of the Calla, the robots, come streaming out of the mountain and attack the townspeople, there's a lot going on all at once, and it's all very action-packed, very quick, very well described. It works really, really well. One thing people may not like about this story is, like almost every other book in the series since The Wastelands, this one ends on a cliffhanger. Doesn't really have an ending. You get a conclusion for the sort of sub-narratives that are contained within this book, but the overall narrative, no, you do not get a complete or coherent ending for it. You have to go and read the next book to find out what happens, and some people may find that frustrating. I actually bought this when it was originally published. I bought the big hardback edition with the paintings in it when it was originally published, so I had to wait for about a year until the next book came out in order to find out what happened, and that was slightly frustrating. I wanted to know, but then again, it's a testament to the story that you want to know. Again, these characters are so well written. Another thing you get in this book is the notion that Roland is kind of nearing the end of his journey. Roland is quite old at this point. I mean, he doesn't know how long he's been traveling. He doesn't know how long he's been wandering the world, so he doesn't know. And of course, every world has its own time, so he doesn't know how old he is. He has no idea, but he's starting to feel his age in this book. He has arthritis. He has arthritis in his fingers and in his back and in his legs, and it's starting to affect the way he works. So he's actually starting to creak around the edges a little bit, which is really cool. You also get some lovely humanizing moments for Roland in this one, because he knows the cultures. The little town of the Calla is like some of the cultures that were baronies of Gilead, which he used to visit once upon a time. And so he knows some of their cultures, he knows some of like their customs, and he joins in. He actually gets involved. He dances at one point. There's a really wonderful sequence where he dances it's called the Kamala. It's a dance called the Kamala. It's like a sort of harvest festival dance. And it's really cool. It's really wonderful to see this moment of levity before everything goes to heck. And at the end of this one, everything does go to heck. I mean, it's quite a dark story, this one. I actually really like this story. I like this one a lot. I think it's well written. I think it's got lots of different elements that are all very well balanced, very well thrown together. I think it shows you what you can do as a writer with stories when you just let it go. There is an element here of King just writing what he wants to write and just getting enthusiastic about it, kind of like extolling what he finds interesting about these characters, about this world, about this universe, but also in his own influence, in his own the stuff that he likes to read. And I get that. I really enjoy that. There is this bravura quality to it where it's just enthusiasm and it's just fun. He's just writing sequences that he likes to write, and I get that. I really enjoy that. When we come back, my loves, we'll be doing the Song of Susanna, and we're near the end now. Book 6 rather. Book 6, Song of Susanna. Nearly the end. Nearly the end. I'm going to be very sad when this is done, I can tell you. Until then, my dears, bye-bye.